সুপ্রিয় দর্শক সবাইকে স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি দীপ্ত টেলিভিশনের নিয়মিত আয়োজন ফার্মিং ফিউচার বাংলাদেশ নিবেদিত দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপে পাওয়ার্ড বাই কাজী ফার্মস। দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপের মাধ্যমে আমরা কৃষির নানাবিধ সমস্যা এবং সমাধানের উপায় নিয়ে আলোচনা করি। ফার্মিং ফিউচার বাংলাদেশ কৃষির বিভিন্ন সমস্যা সমাধানের উপায়, কৃষির আবিষ্কার এবং উন্নয়ন নিয়ে প্রতিনিয়ত কাজ করে যাচ্ছে। সেই ধারাবাহিকতায় আমাদের এই আয়োজন। আমরা আজকে আলোচনা করছি বিশ্ব খাদ্য দিবস 2021 নিয়ে। আমাদের সাথে আজকে আলোচনায় স্টুডিওতে যুক্ত হয়েছেন জাতিসংঘের খাদ্য ও কৃষি সংস্থা FAOর বাংলাদেশ প্রতিনিধি জনাব রবার্ট সিমসন। মিস্টার রবার্ট, ওয়েলকাম ইউ টু আওয়ার স্টুডিও অফ দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপ।
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
দর্শক, খাদ্য এবং পুষ্টি নিরাপত্তা নিশ্চিতকরণে বাংলাদেশ সহ পৃথিবীর বিভিন্ন দেশ প্রতিনিয়ত কাজ করে যাচ্ছে। সেই কর্ম পরিকল্পনা এবং ধারাবাহিকতা রক্ষা করতে সরকার, কৃষক এবং কৃষির সাথে সংশ্লিষ্ট যারা আছেন সবাই বিভিন্ন রকম কার্যক্রম গ্রহণ করছে। আমাদের এই বছরের বিশ্ব খাদ্য দিবসের প্রতিপাদ্য বিষয় হচ্ছে আমাদের কর্মই আমাদের ভবিষ্যৎ, উন্নত উৎপাদন, উন্নত পুষ্টি, উন্নত পরিবেশ এবং উন্নত জীবন। আমরা আজকে বিশ্ব খাদ্য দিবসের এই একেবারেই শেষ মুহূর্তে এসে জানতে চাইব আসলে খাদ্য উৎপাদন এবং পুষ্টি উৎপাদন নিশ্চিতকরণে বাংলাদেশ সহ পৃথিবীর বিভিন্ন দেশ কী কী কার্যক্রম গ্রহণ করছে। রবার্ট, ওয়েলকাম ইউ অ্যাগেন টু দ্য স্টুডিও অফ দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপ। টুডে উইল বি টকিং অ্যাবাউট World Food Day 2021.
Thank you.
So I would start with the question and discussion that what is the theme of this year's World Food Day 2021, and what are the priorities of this event, and what activities we are doing in regard to this Food Day celebration.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you for having me on your show. World Food Day is a very important day for the Food and Agriculture Organization. And a little known fact is World Food Day is actually the day that FAO was created back in 1945. So World Food Day is celebrated every year on the 16th of October to really look at what are the challenges we're facing in terms of food security and nutrition security around the world. How do we bring more information to people, to sensitize folks to nutritious eating and the importance of our farmers and our food systems, our food production and consumption, et cetera. A little known fact is around the world it's celebrated in over 150 different countries, all on the same day. And particularly in Bangladesh, the Minister of Agriculture always takes the lead in the celebration. They do an absolutely fantastic job. Now, overall, there's a new theme every year. And the theme this year is our actions are our future. And we focus on better nutrition, better production, better environment, for a better life. And all this comes down to looking at our food systems. And if we're looking at better production, this is meaning higher profits, better production for farmers, but it has to be done sustainably, so in an environmentally friendly way, so better environment, but also better nutrition. And we find that around the world, our nutrition challenges are actually increasing in spite of the world becoming more wealthy and having greater technologies for food production. All of these three areas lead to a better life. So looking at poverty reduction, looking at
improved production,
reducing hunger, and finally ensuring that there's an equitable solution in terms of food systems.
More sustainable to the environment and even beneficial for the farmers and consumers.
That's correct. Yeah. And these four betters are the foundation of FAO's new strategic framework. So we're really trying to sensitize people to this issue this year. Thank you.
Yeah. So Robert, as you mentioned that there are few areas that FAO and countries in different part of the world are working, but we have seen a significant impact in last 1.5 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So how countries are learning to adopt and mitigate those challenges, keeping the impact minimized and reduced?
Yep. Well, so that's a fantastic question, and the COVID pandemic is a new stressor on food systems, but we had challenges prior to the pandemic. There was upwards of 811 million people around the world that were not getting adequate diets and going hungry already. So that's nearly 10% of the global population. The COVID-19 exacerbated that in many different ways. On a global level, it impacted our supply chains. So we saw more fluctuation in staple prices of things like wheat, rice, soya, some of these crops that are the foundation of our carbohydrate consumption each year. At a country level, especially when the pandemic would hit its peaks in some of the outbreaks, you'd have lockdowns which would essentially close down all supply chains nationally. And you had huge challenges for disposable
crops.
Crops, yeah. So crops were rotting on the vine. Poultry sector had a huge hit, and that people weren't buying nearly as much chicken as before. Milk was being dumped in the streets because there was nobody to buy it. The other area where there's a huge impact was on all of the people that were day laborers that relied on a daily income to buy their food. So there was a huge reduction in demand because of the economy being hit by this. Now, the one thing I'll say about Bangladesh, which is very promising, is overall the economy didn't slow nearly as much as it did in other countries, and it's because of agriculture is a big foundation of the economy, but the economy here is diversified in such a way where production was still ongoing. So there was a slow in the economy, whereas other countries that are more impacted actually had reductions in their economy and negative growth during the year. So I think Bangladesh actually has done quite well. Now, it has impacted the nutritional intake of the average person or the folks that were in day labors. So this area requires a much stronger support and targeted support in social security programs.
Yeah. Robert, we were talking about the impact of COVID-19 and how these countries are learning from that, and how very intensified attention should be given to many of the marginalized community. So with that, we also are talking about like transforming the system, the agricultural system. Yep. We'd like to hear from you that how this definition came forward and how this can be adopted from a futuristic perspective.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So I'll start with the idea of what is a food system, and then what is the ideal food system. So a food system is basically everything in the value chain of how we produce, transport, sell, the distribution of our food, how it's marketed, the fresh markets versus supermarkets, how consumer demand affects our systems. As well, an area of our food system that people don't often look at is the food loss and wastage, how we either compost this or dispose of this and hopefully put it back into our nutrient cycle or back into our soils. And this is an area that's often forgotten in food transformation, food systems transformations. Now, recently, the Food Systems Summit was organized in New York on the 23rd and 24th of September. And a lot of the discussions that came out of this was the need for transformational change in our food systems. Mm-hmm. Now, the ideal food system will ensure sustainable and profitable production in a socially cohesive and acceptable way, but also an environmentally acceptable way. So looking at the greenhouse gas production from different agriculture products and trying to minimize that, so it's a more sustainable overall. Now, how are we doing that? The targeting of this is ensuring that we use climate-smart agriculture in our production systems, which means potentially things like precision agriculture and trying to minimize the amount of fertilizer or pesticides that are used.
Or reducing the carbon and things like that.
Which reduces the carbon. It also takes care of our soils, and our soils are one of the biggest carbon sinks on the planet. So this is extremely important, along with better and more sustainable fishing practices, looking at the blue economy, which looks at the pollution that we put into our oceans and trying to minimize that so that our oceans can act as a carbon sink as well to help minimize climate change issues. But we also go back to this idea of equity or profitability. Mm-hmm. There has to be an effort to help farmers produce profitably and sell at higher prices directly to consumers.
So isn't it be very challenging that in one way we are talking about productivity and then commercialization and profitability, and on the other hand we want to minimize the impact of environmental impact in the production? So how this gonna make sense, and how it will really work?
These ideas are not mutually exclusive. Just because it's not necessarily happening today doesn't mean it can happen. And there's many instances of how this happens. So FAO is supporting projects right now that are using solar energy to do pest management and pest surveillance to understand where There's potential pest outbreaks and what kind of pests are menacing farmers and their crops. We're also using solar-powered irrigation systems that minimize, they do drip irrigation through a solar power system that minimizes the amount of water, so it minimizes water wastage, but it also provides high productivity to the farmer. These are just two examples of how you do this. In a more high-tech scenario, you can use precision agriculture. So you look at, with satellite imaging and soil samples of farmers' plots, you understand exactly how much fertilizer, organic matter, urea versus potassium that needs to go into the soil, or nitrogen, in order to strengthen the quality of that soil without over-fertilizing, for example.
Robert, we were talking about technology adoption and food system transformation. So how communities are actually getting introduced with these new ideas, and how they are going to adopt these newer technologies?
Yep. That's a very good question, and the communities are adapting to the situation they're in now. I think, particularly in Bangladesh, I recognize that it's a population that is founded on entrepreneurship, and I've been very impressed at how farmers will go out and look for information on their own. So those that have smartphones or a tablet or access to this new technologies are actually using some of the modern apps that look at
the crop, different issues related to production and price and marketing, everything.
Different crops, looking for pricing information online, looking for how to identify certain pests and how to address them, to look for new inputs and things that allow them to be more productive. So this is quite remarkable. But there's also other means of just going out through agriculture extension. And this is a science that has brought agriculture productivity forward through the last century at least. And one area that FAO has been working on is testing producer organization pilots and supporting producer organizations to understand new technologies and move from subsistence style farming to a more agribusiness style farming. And we've started with this by using application that FAO developed to help them develop a business strategy. And we worked with them with the numbers until they get profitable numbers out of their business strategy, and then we help them invest to make that business strategy a reality. Another area where we're demonstrating the use of technology to them was during the pandemic and during the major lockdowns, we helped 50 different producer organizations develop what we call a virtual call center. And we helped support transporters to pick up products and bring it to market, to vendors. And we'd also bring inputs from the dealers out to the farmer again. And this system has caught on so well, they're still using it beyond the pandemic. They were able to maintain sales during the pandemic, but they also increased their profitability by over 5 to 10% on every product during that period. So this now, as an example, now be rolled out in a larger scale. And we're working with the Ministry of Agriculture to try to bring this up to a more systematic level.
I'd like to share one thing, that Bangladesh is gaining momentum in getting food and nutrition security. But do you think that the timeline that you have to make the world get zero hunger, as we have the mandate from Sustainable Development Goal, but counting from this year, we have only 7 to 8 years of cropping time. So do you think that it's very feasible and realistic to achieve that goal, or we need to work more?
That's a good question. Bangladesh is one of the countries that's proven at the forefront. And during the Food System Summit, it was recognized that Bangladesh in just a short 50 years has come from food dependency from the international community to being self-sufficient in cereals and moving to self-sufficiency in terms of protein, fish, poultry, egg, beef, dairy, etc. So I think there's a strong movement in this direction. I think in Bangladesh it's a question of not necessarily, well, the production is still growing faster than the population, so that's a very good sign. What the bigger challenge is the equity and distribution. And so making sure that the entire population has access to healthy, safe, and nutritious diets at all times is more challenging. And that's what we are supporting in our policy initiatives and our specific field initiatives, supporting and working with government to ensure that that happens. Now, can I predict that in 7, 8 years this will happen? I won't make that prediction, but I think of all the countries in the world, Bangladesh is making great strides.
But one thing we constantly hear from the farm community that they have much produce in the field, yet they don't get a good price in the market. So you think that international development partner or the countries or the government policy should work on the two?
Yep. Yeah, this is a challenge. I mean, this is a huge economy. There's 170 million people approximately in Bangladesh. It's hard to manage that type of market, and supply and demand kicks in. And when the demand is much lower, especially in terms of pandemic periods, it's harder to market and make that profit. Now, on the other hand, you see a much higher price on products sold in markets in the urban areas relative to what the farmer's getting at farm gate. And so having these stronger linkages in marketing for farmers direct to wholesalers or communities and consumers is one means of adjusting that equity scale. And so a movement in that direction is certainly seen as a positive. And so it would certainly promote that as one of the tools to try to bridge this gap in terms of equity toward the farmer.
So we have a lot of innovation and a lot of adoption and everything. But yet almost 40% of the world population are actually deprived of nutritious food. So you think that the food behavior and the consumers' behavior can really bring some positive change to it?
We have to remain positive. We have to remain hopeful, but at the same time, we need to strategize. So I believe that, yes, by addressing the systematic approach of how our food is produced and distributed, and consciously through innovative policy perspectives of how we target our social programs, social protection programs, and how we get food to these vulnerable populations, will make that change. But we have to have a conscious effort at a policy level to move in that direction.
And with the governance and even from the production, we need enough, positivity from the farmer that they responsibly grow their crop, which is more sustainable for the environment. What do you think?
That's correct. And so I want to use one example. It's a project that's jointly initiated and implemented by FAO and WFP, and it's funded by the government of Sweden, where we're supporting local farmers to have direct linkages through sustainable and using good agriculture practice and best COVID practices to bring their produce directly to markets that are adjacent to some of the most vulnerable communities inside of Dhaka city, so that we're making that market linkage. So the farmer's still making a profit on their product, but they're selling it at reduced prices directly to those that need the produce the most. And it's shown to be a mutually beneficial social protection mechanism that we're piloting now that could easily be scaled up in many different areas.
Great. So any take-home message for the audience, because today we are celebrating the World Food Day. So what message you have for our audience?
A couple of really simple but really important messages. Before you eat today, think about what you put in your mouth, meaning make sure it's healthy and nutritious, that maybe it's not a processed food, that it's whole foods. The second one is think about where it came from, and which farmer and how was that product produced? How did it get to your plate or to your palate? And once you're finished with it, how is it being managed as you throw it in the garbage can? Do those nutrients get back into the soil somehow?
Robert, thank you today for coming to the studio and sharing many information to our audience. I think both the consumers and producers will be benefited from this discussion today. দর্শক, আজকে আমরা আলোচনা করলাম বিশ্ব খাদ্য দিবস 2021-এর প্রতিপাদ্য বিষয় নিয়ে। আমরা কি খাচ্ছি, কিভাবে তা উৎপাদন করা হচ্ছে, সেই উৎপাদন প্রক্রিয়ায় জড়িত কৃষক, কৃষিবিদ, বিজ্ঞানী এবং অন্যান্য যেই উন্নয়ন আমাদের প্রতিনিধি আছেন বা সংস্থাগুলো আছে, সবারই আসলে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা রয়েছে। খাদ্য এবং পুষ্টি নিরাপত্তা একটি গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয়। সেই গুরুত্ব অনুধাবন করে আসলে সবাইকেই সম্মিলিতভাবে এই লক্ষ্য অর্জনে কাজ করে যেতে হবে। সেই আশাবাদ নিয়েই আজকে শেষ করছি ফার্মিং ফিউচার বাংলাদেশ নিবেদিত দীপ্ত কৃষি সংলাপের এই সপ্তাহের আয়োজন। আমাদের পরবর্তী আয়োজন দেখার আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি শুক্রবার বিকেল 5টা 20 মিনিটে। সবাই ভালো থাকবেন, ধন্যবাদ।